So let's think about a few examples of decision illusions. This is my favorite plot in all of social science. It's a plot that shows some countries in Europe and how many people in these countries are interested in donating their organs after they pass away. Now, these are not the people who actually donate, because whether a desire to donate translates into real donation depends on how you die, what your family members want, and so on. But these are the people who are interested in it. Now, when you look at this plot, you see countries on the right that give a lot and countries on the left that give very little. And the question is why? Why do some countries give a lot and some countries give a little? And when I ask my students this question, they usually think it's about culture. After all, with regular gifts, you get to enjoy the act of gift giving. You get to give somebody a gift, you get to look at their appreciation in their eyes. With organ donations, not so much. You give it after you die to somebody anonymous. Or you could say maybe it's about culture, or maybe it's about the law, or maybe it's about religion. But mostly they think it's about caring about other people in your society. But here's the interesting thing. When you look at this list, you can see countries that we think about as very similar from a cultural, religious, legal perspective, behaving very differently. For example, Sweden is all the way on the right. Denmark is all the way on the left. Germany is in the left group. Austria is in the right group. Depending on where you are in the world, you either think of the UK and France as either similar or different. The closer you are, by the way, to those two countries, you think they're more different. But anyway, what you can see is that they are very different in terms of organ donation. And finally, the example I like the most to think about is the comparison between the Netherlands, Holland, and Belgium. Holland gives about 28%. Belgium gives almost 98%. Very similar countries. Now, what's interesting about this case is that the Netherlands got to 28% after huge effort. They mailed every citizen in the country a letter begging them to join the organ donation program. There was coverage on television, there was coverage in the radio, there was really lots of information out there. And we don't know how much it cost them, but you can imagine it was very, very expensive. And all it got them was 28%. What did Belgium do? By the way, I should tell you that Holland, the Netherlands, also did a reality TV show in which people who were about to die got to choose who they want to leave their organs to. It was very controversial, of course, and it went off the air rather quickly. But it clearly was a central focus of attention in the country. So anyway, so with all this effort, they got to 28%. You can ask yourself, what effort did Belgium do? How much money did they spend on it? And the answer is they spend zero. They spend much, much, much less than the Netherlands. So what does explain the difference between the countries on the left and the countries on the right? It turns out it's one little thing, which is the enrollment form. And here's the secret to this whole thing. Some countries, like the countries on the left, have a form that says, check the box if you want to participate in the organ donation program. And what do people do when they see this form? They do nothing. They don't check the box and they don't join the program. These are the countries on the left. The countries on the right have a slightly different form. It says, check the box below if you don't want to participate in the organ donation program. And what do people do in this second case? They do the same exact thing. They don't check, but now they join. Now we call this opt-in and opt-out, and this is also a question of what is the default choice. And this is really kind of an amazing phenomenon, and because of that I think it's worthwhile spending a few minutes on this. So first of all, when we go around our lives, we have a tremendous sense of agency. We feel that we make decisions. We decide what to eat and what to wear and how to drive and whether or not to donate our organs and how to save for retirement and all kinds of decisions like that. But if you take these results seriously, what they suggest is that yes, we make decisions, but the people who design the forms in which we make decisions have a lot to say about our final decisions. The people who design the environment in which we make decisions have a lot to do with how our final decisions would actually look like. And we call this choice architecture. And again, how much role do we have to play and how much is the environment in which we're being placed has to do with what decisions we make. We tend to view it as our decisions, but I would like you to consider the possibility the environment in which we make decisions has a much larger role and much larger role that we give it credit. The second thing to point out is that, of course, defaults, the path of least resistance, what has been pre-filled for us, is going to be incredibly important for decisions that we don't pay attention to. If you get a 7-page legal document and you read only the first page, whatever is set up in page 2 to 7 is going to be carried out for you automatically without you paying attention. But as decisions get bigger, as they become more complex, they also become more difficult. And as they become more difficult, when we face them, we do what? We do nothing. We take the path of least resistance. And this is why defaults are not just important for things we don't pay attention to, they're also important for very important decisions. Because as decision gets bigger, we don't know what to do, we give up, we do nothing, and we let the person who designed the form to decide for us. The final thing I want to point out is that these are things that we have very bad intuitions about. Imagine I send you tomorrow to the Department of Motor Vehicle or wherever it is that you register for organ donation, and imagine that you either got the opt-in form or you got the opt-out form. And after you finish your decision, you came out of that office and I met you and I say, why did you decide what you decided? And imagine that just like these Europeans, if you got the opt-out form, you would donate, and if you got the opt-in form, you would not donate. Would any of you have the insight to tell me that the form told you to do so? Would anybody have the insight to say, I didn't really know what to do, but the form was designed in this way, and therefore it made me choose this way? Of course not. We have a fantastic amount of cognitive skills, and we use it to tell a story about why we chose those decisions. If you got the opt-in form, you would say, well, you know, I'm not so sure about doctors and trusting them, and will somebody pull my plug a little earlier if I sign this form? And if you got the opt-out form, you would say, oh, I'm a generous, kind, wonderful person who cares about other people. In all cases, you would tell stories about why what you decided was a great decision, but those stories would not necessarily be a true reflection of the reason, of what's caused that decision. This, by the way, is also important when we try to get people to explain to us why they're doing what they're doing. There's lots of people who are using focus groups. They get some 12 people into a room and they get them to discuss it and tell us why they're doing what they're doing. I think you should question very seriously the reasons people give you for doing what they're doing, and instead we should move to looking at their behavior more clearly rather than an explanation of it and stories about it. There's a couple of more interesting things to say about default and path of least resistance. One of them is a story I want to tell you about a medical company. This is a company that sends people medication in the mail every 90 days. If you have some kind of long-term ailment, you might get your medication from this company every 90 days. Now, here is what happens in terms of the procedure regularly. Patients go to the doctor, and the doctor writes them a prescription. And the doctor can write them a prescription for branded medications or generic medications. Now, of course, we all know that the drug companies apply all kinds of pressures to physicians, and often physicians write the branded medication rather than generic medications. Okay, so we have patients that start their medical path by getting branded medications. And then this company writes them and tries to convince them to move to generic medication. So they write them a letter and they say, please, please, please move to generic medications. And what do the patients do? They do nothing. So then they write them a colorful brochure. They send them a colorful brochure, and then they send them a postcard, and they try all kinds of tricks, and what happens? Basically nothing. So for a period, this particular company tried zero copay. They wrote people a letter and say, if you switch to generic, you personally would pay nothing for it for a while. What happened? Almost nothing. So then this company came to a group of social scientists and said, you know, looks like people hate generics. People love branded and hate generics. And of course, there could be all kinds of reasons for that, and we can talk about that. But what we said to them was, we said, look, it's possible that people hate generics and love branded, but it's also possible that people hate doing anything. And if you think about the particular procedure you used, it's hard to separate whether people hate the particular offer you gave them or they hate doing anything. Think about it. People going on around their own business, minding their own business, and this company said, please do something different, please do something different. The fact that people did not do something different, is it because they don't want to do something different, or is it because they don't like that particular offer? So they came up with a different approach. We call this forced choice. It's like you bring people to a T intersection, and you say to people, look, you cannot not return this letter. If you don't return this letter, we will stop your medications. So the cost is enormous. You better return this letter. But when you return this letter, you could choose branded or you can choose generic. It's up to you. At this cost branded, at this cost generic, it's up to you. But not returning the letter now is not an option. What happened? Almost 90% of the people chose generics. So here's the thing. Do people like generics or hate generics? Well, depending on how you look at it. If you look at it with the regular procedure, it looks like they love branded and hate generics. If you look at it with the forced choice procedure, it looks like people love generic and hate branded. The reality is that what people really hate is sending letters back. Now, when you go to people and ask them directly, or when you think about it yourself, you say, a letter, it's a tiny bump in the road. How much can it matter? Turns out it matters a lot. I would say as a general statement, you cannot overestimate, most likely, the importance of what seems to you small bumps in the road. If you look at what people actually do, and you look at all these small bumps in the road, to the extent you could eliminate those, you could probably change behavior in a very, very powerful way. Let me give you another example for this. There was a beautiful study done on physicians. This was a large group of physicians, and they described to them a patient. They said you have this 67-year-old patient who's been suffering from right hip pain. And you as the doctor have tried all kinds of medications. You tried all kinds of things. Nothing seems to be working. So a little while ago, you referred the patient to a hip replacement specialist. And they have a meeting with this hip replacement specialist. And by the way, what do you think happens to people who meet a hip replacement specialist? There's a good chance they'll have a hip replacement after that. But for now, there's been a default. The patient has been referred, they have a meeting, and we think we know what will happen after that. And then they took this group of physicians and divided them into two. And for the first group, they said, yesterday, you reviewed the case. You examined it, and to your amazement, you realized that you forgot to try one medication. You forgot to try ibuprofen. Now, what do? Do you do nothing and let the patient continue with hip replacement? Or do you call them up and say, hey, I forgot this medication, I forgot ibuprofen, try it for a while. Cancel your meeting, try ibuprofen. What do you think? What would the majority of the physicians do? Think to yourself. Well, good news, the majority of the physicians in this case said that they will try ibuprofen. After all, hip replacement is expensive, dangerous, irreversible, and so on. So the majority said that ibuprofen is a better choice, and it's good and understandable, and we're happy that they're doing it. The second group of physicians were given the same exact case, but with one small difference. They said to them, yesterday when you reviewed the case, you realized that there were two medications you forgot, ibuprofen and piroxicam. And they said, what do? Do you do nothing and let the patient continue with hip replacement or the potential for hip replacement, or do you call them back? And if you call them back, do you try ibuprofen or do you try piroxicam? Now think about those two cases. The decision to do nothing and let the patient continue with hip replacement is the same ease and difficulty in both cases. The decision to call them back in the second case is more complex. There's another path for the decision tree. We call them back and then ibuprofen or piroxicam. What happened now? Now, between around 72% of the physicians chose to do nothing and let the patient continue with hip replacement. And here are the things to consider. First of all, next time you go to see your doctor, you should worry. You should think about what are the defaults that have been set. The second thing to realize is that no doctor in the right mind, given the choice hip replacement or ibuprofen, will choose hip replacement. But the moment hip replacement has been set as the default, the path of least resistance, the path in which I'll have to do nothing in order to get, it becomes more important. And the moment deviating from the default becomes more complex, more difficult, it has more choices, more steps, even if it's only two, that becomes even more difficult. And the default is becoming even more likely. And this happens to physicians, presumably professional, well-paid, who are doing these decisions day in and day out. I want to give you one last example of defaults. This was a beautiful study run in a grocery store in Mountain View, California called Draeger's. And imagine that you walk down the supermarket, and at an aisle you usually don't check out, there's going to be a table with some jams set on it. And sometimes it will have few jams, and sometimes there will be many jams. Few versus many. And the first question is, what would attract your attention to a higher degree? And you know, unsurprisingly, more jams are more exciting. About 40% of the people approach the 6 jam booth, and about 60% of the people approach the 24 jam booth. So more jams are more colorful, more interesting, more things are happening, more people go. That's great. What about tasting jams? Turns out people try 1 or 2, 1.5 on average, and nobody sits there and tries all 24 jams. So that doesn't matter. But what about the most important decision? What about buying jams? In this experiment, everybody was given a coupon. And the coupon was good not just for the 6 jams and not just for the 24 jams. It was good for every one of the 300 jams at Draeger's. What happens now? What do you think? Where will there be more choices? Now, to think about this, we want to go back to the default. What is the default of buying jam? Okay, so here's the answer. In the 6 jam condition, 30% of the people bought jam. In a 24 jam condition, about 3% of the people bought jam. So let's go back and think about defaults. What is the default for buying jam? Some people have jam on their shopping list. And if you have jam on your shopping list, you're going to buy it. You'll see few, you'll see many. If it's on your shopping list, you're going to buy it. But for most people, jam is not on their shopping list, which means that it's not part of the default. Now, what is the rate of people having jam on their shopping list? It's about 3%. How did the 6 jam condition get so much action on jam? People tasted jam. They said, oh, jam, sweet, tasty, interesting. Let me try some. But the moment you got to 24, the complexity of the decision, the amount of options overwhelmed the desire. And all of a sudden people say, 24, I'm just not sure. I don't know which one to choose. Maybe next time. And then maybe next time and maybe next time. Now, this basically shows us that defaults are important. And again, as complexity increases, the defaults become even more important. So I'll give you one last example for this. Imagine that you worked for me. And imagine that we had a retirement plan in which if you contribute some of your salary, I would contribute the same amount for your retirement plan. And imagine I did not want you to save for retirement for whatever reason. How could I use these tricks to get you not to save for retirement? First thing we would do is we would make it an opt-in, right? You would not be in the system and you have to fill a form. Maybe you would have to, it's a long form, maybe it's a complex form, maybe you have to submit it in the other building. The second thing is we would want to make it difficult with lots of choices. So maybe I'll give you a big booklet with all kinds of retirement options, lots of things to choose from. Then I could make it even more complex. I could write you a letter that says, dear employee, you're about to face the most important financial decision of your life. If I were you, I would look carefully at all the options, make the calculations, and figure it out correctly. Maybe I would give you a spreadsheet to help you figure out all the options and what's ideal for you. Now, what would happen when you have this opt-in, an incredibly complex system? Maybe you will take it home, and maybe one weekend you would look at a few options and try to figure it out. Maybe the next weekend you will spend another hour or two, but eventually it would fade away and you will not invest in your retirement plan. Now, I could use the same thing and do the opposite. I could make it complex, many options, spreadsheet and so on, but put you in an opt-out situation. I could put you in a situation where you automatically enroll in something. And now the default will help you save. By the way, in the financial world, there's another benefit. We can have something called lifestyle fund, which automatically balance between stocks and bonds depending on where you are in terms of age. So the idea here is that defaults are neither good nor bad. They're just everywhere, and we have to understand and recognize them, and we have to think about when are they working for us and when are they not working for us. And by looking at it carefully, I think we can actually get people to make better decisions.